My name is Dennis Liu, and I'm with Ford Motor Company. It's an honor to join you guys today, albeit it's going to be virtually given everything that's going on. So our friends at Coach invited me to speak a little bit of patient opportunities and how we think of leverage our business as a traditional OEM manufacturer as we play relative to startups and kind of work together towards a better future. So with that, I'd like to jump into the slides, and I'll leave my contact information at the end so we can connect and follow up as necessary. Dennis Liu. I'm an associate director with Ford Motor Company. What I do is I look after the venture asset class of investments with a particular focus on the early stage opportunities. Physically, I sit with our research advanced engineering folks in Palo Alto, although reporting structure wise, most of my reporting team goes up through the ranks in Dearborn. Our investment thesis in sort of three buckets. So things that are in emerging / mobility, meaning things that get you from point A to point B. Second would be core, and that would include things that we traditionally understand, including traditional manufacturing, supply chain logistics, marketing, sales capabilities. And these are things also that enable us to think about find our business in the future. And the last bucket is, as we call it, EV, AV, EV electrified vehicles, AV autonomous vehicles, and other, which really is a lot of the early stage connectivity and the software impact capabilities that we don't necessarily have within Ford today. As you can imagine, we're a company with deep medical and electrical engineering capabilities. When the newer disciplines of engineering, software type things, AI, computer vision, machine learning, these are areas that we could benefit plugging in more with startups in the earlier stage technologies. As you can see with these three very broad buckets, that if you have a startup, I could probably fit them into one, if not more than one of these buckets. With that, enough about myself, and I'll talk a little bit more about the team. So Ford historically, as you all know, has a proud history in traditional manufacturing. We're known well for building vehicles and building them at a very efficient clip. And as this world has changed, it really has changed from traditional horse and buggy into mass market, at the precipice of a very new defined area of mobility. And as a traditional manufacturer who has a very different base and capabilities, how do we think about the future? And hopefully we can address how we tackle some of those. So first of all, we understand the technology today is now something that's very different. It's no longer help sort of progress from a tier 2 to a tier 1 into where we are at the OEM perspective to deliver ultimately to the hand of the customer. And as you think about this change in the world where the digital footprint of individuals now is starting to bleed very much into some of the hardware capabilities, this is the very same trend that has happened with us as a company of really making a lot of widgets and leveraging the influx of software capabilities and marry this up into delivery of technology and product that our customers will come to enjoy and love. So this is a little bit sort of a fun video as you think about some of our future and design folks thinking of this change in the world. Some of the things that you've noticed is people have gone and their lives have changed because of various factors. One of the ones that impact all of us today would be the sort of pandemic and the COVID needs. And even before that, there was a drastic change in folks thinking about sharing and borrowing. How do you kind of look at things that from a roads perspective was built really with think towards the future? You are seeing cities and municipalities that are saying, can I repurpose some of these roads? Has the way we live life changed? And is this sort of urban sprawl something that we really want to do? And it goes back to some of these trends that I'll talk about right now, that I think there is a shift in there. And how do we, as a company, that sort of predetermined world, and how do we make this transition into a lot of the changes that are impacting all of us today? So one of the things, begins with urbanization. A lot more people are moving towards the city, although you would see with given current sort of environment news, again, people are revisiting, is this the ideal state? Flexible and try to address that. The growth of the global middle class. I think this is one where the increased propensity to spend and commiserate desire to have different experiences and how we want to experience the world is a change from the traditional sort of every man, woman, and child will have 2 Mustangs and a pickup truck in their fence, and of how we thought of our products. But as we become much more of a global player and it's very regional and localized and hyper localized in some instances, how do our products continue to define us as a company that becomes relevant in each of those individual markets? Obviously, another thing that's a huge concern is air quality. And looking back even very early on, Bill Ford has taken a very personal approach to this, and it's really important that a lot of these green initiatives aren't just for fun. And for us as a company, we believe that on the backs of this great manufacturing progress, it is also our responsibility to try to think of, I think air quality is one that's very near and dear to our hearts, that's also really important for overall society. And the last piece is you think of changing consumer attitudes. We all grew up with, and at least I did, my parents said, don't talk to people on the internet and don't get in strangers' cars. And if you look at some of the ride stranger to your house and get in their car. And I think part of this is also the change in the way that we now engage in technology and how technology enables it. So how do we as a company that's deliver you a vehicle think about mobility, and how do we continue to deliver these trusted services and products in this newly defined world? Line to specifically around mobility is this idea of autonomy and robotics. The fact that these robotics and capabilities within the AI and sort of machine learning and a lot of these new disciplines that I hinted at earlier are now very much part of our business and how we experience the world. And can we some of these smart functionality onto the both electrification of the fleet and robotics, whether it's at the vehicles level, AI and AV kind of being a very fancy form, to some of the traditional manufacturing pieces where can we leverage these new sensors and such to really help drive our business? Like, is connectivity something that we can use to change the way we've historically done business? And the answer is all of these matter, and these are all areas that we spend quite a lot of time thinking about. Kind of looking at specifically from my office's perspective in Palo Alto, we're one of the early companies in the future. What is an area that has a lot of technology and innovation that maybe we should try to think about embodying? And we were one of the earlier companies out here in Silicon Valley, one of the first offices out here. And you can see from this map, in 2014, there were a handful of us. A lot of the autos were saying, hey, let's come out there. Fast forward a couple years later, you see these offices go from not just the OEM with an interest there, but you start seeing some of these suppliers. And also you've got the guys like Lyft and Uber and this crazy company Tesla and some of these other smaller players that are really becoming legitimate competitors. And so fast forward to a couple years later, or one more year later, you see, well, there's a lot more activity here, a lot more of companies that are even specifically geared towards automotive. And remember, historically, automotive was not necessarily in a space that you would think of, especially within capabilities of the value. It's an interesting time where the flow of talent, capital, and interest have all sort of coalesced around what we now understand to be mobility. But in the early stages, it was still, we're figuring out how to play with you, how to do it. And a big part of our job is to help bridge that traditional manufacturing, huge conglomerate, sort of the move fast and break things attitude and innovation mentality of Silicon Valley, and how do we do this safely and kind of deliver a product both internally and to our customers that we can actually make something of. You look at a year later, even more crowded, it's starting to get pretty hot, and the joke is, at least for me, you start seeing, well, looks like the winner no matter what in lawyer folks. And fast forward today, we're almost running out of space in this map. But I think without diving too deep into all the individual pieces, is what you realize is there is such a strong interest, and by extension, there's a competition for talent and capabilities, but also a huge opportunity, meaning it really many different sort of contributors in this ecosystem to make this a thing. I'll touch upon this a little bit later, but you just see how this explosion really is a culmination of pent-up demand and also some really talented, really smart folks starting to play in the space. Why are we all here? A big part of the Silicon Valley, this sort of idea of a primordial soup. You have the perfect mix of academic prowess with the many university here, a huge contingent of folks that are working on some really cool projects, and these talent and company and the sort of culture of the ecosystem is startup, but you can also be at some of the tip top of the technology companies out here. And remember, back once upon a Silicon Valley did actually make silicon, and some of those hardware capabilities really helped define as we think about the intersect of hardware and software. And what's really interesting, you pour, and it really created this cycle and sort of positive reinforcement of here are a lot of really cool opportunities and people that have an attitude to go try and make things. The joke is our office is right off of Page Mill, which is where all the lawyers are. One freeway exit up is where Sand Hill is where all the VCs. And the joke is Stanford or Berkeley, or pick one of these tip-top schools, come with an idea, gather some folks to work on things, and in the morning go get some lawyers to set up your company. In the afternoon, be running up and down Sand Hill Road and try to look for funding. It's not that simple, but the idea is you're in such close proximity, and there's such a things that this is really an ecosystem that we understand speed and ability to kind of tackle hard problems in a concerted manner is what sets this apart. And this open collaboration where you're really responsible to your own performance, whether regardless of what company you're at, is what sets people up to try to contribute and build something big. The idea also is, in the ultimate end of the exit, that these folks continue to reinforce and invest, whether it's talent or capabilities or money, back into the system, and hopefully this system continues to grow. One of the things that I found really inspiring was a quote from Henry Ford: "Some scrap any method, abandon any theory, and if the success of the job requires it." And we think of our jobs not merely as a satellite office in Silicon Valley. We are tasked with looking and identifying new opportunities, and also figuring out perhaps the way we've always done things has room for improvement, and the flexibility that Mr. Henry Ford most interestingly noted many years ago is still highly applicable today. What drives this is ultimately, as you think about the transformation of automotive and mobility, and these numbers might be a little bit off, but you think of it this way: the share of this traditional automotive revenue. And what you really care about is less so of what each individual OEM is fighting for on the traditional auto pie, and think of the total transportation services value chain. And across this, I would say there are so many different areas that I just haven't really touched upon. But from a consumer, it's one sort of problem. It's how do I get around? And this piece, if you look at the massive market there, is still TBD on what's going to be the thing. And frankly, most OEMs aren't really making any money from this space. A lot of it's still in a very nascent stage. And this implies, here, both startups and traditional players alike. And one of the things that drives this thought process and this shift in thinking is traditional Ford's historical orientation is we're building you an automobile. I make an automobile, I sell it to you, and then we perform some service potentially afterwards, and we continue this relationship. It's an oversimplification, but the focus is obviously automobiles. As you think about the future, and mobility is being redefined away from being automobile centric, and we go from anywhere from walking to scooters to bikes to shuttles and other larger footprints of potential. That is, mobility is all of these things, and maybe not within our lifetimes, but I think you'll see into the future many different players are saying, how are these an integrated approach to spend for folks? And for us, what is the customer's needs? Again, moving you around, whatever the mechanism may be. Some of the things, as we dive a little bit deeper, we understand that this change also means that the change in the technologies enable it. And as mentioned before, we probably know anything that there is to know about transmissions and any of the number of the widgets that's on a car today. But as you think about some of the enabling technologies, so autonomous vehicles really needing bleeding edge technologies that are a marriage of hardware and software pieces, these are areas that frankly is a huge opportunity for not just traditional players and some of the large tier 1, tier 2s, but really frankly for startups. A few years ago, LiDAR wasn't even a thing. Back then when we invested in Bell, there were 2 companies. Today, we're tracking nearly 80 something companies, and that's just in the LiDAR space. As you think about radar and cameras getting better and some of these other sensors, other capabilities, there's clearly a motivation for earlier that traditional was blocked because of the sort of tiered structure. And this isn't intentional by any means. It's really because the capabilities and needs just and cost perspective never really aligned. And today the needs and the capabilities are actually getting to a place where there is huge opportunity for us to find partners with much larger entities that maybe we're much better at scaling and producing a large number of widgets, but we definitely would be open to kind of folks helping us on the technology side. It's not a Ford specific mentality. It's very much a lot of our frenemies out here in the space in Silicon Valley. If you think about this, what you've seen is a sort of breaking up of the key things that now matter for a car. It used to be just individual pieces to fit together into a car. And as you think about mobility now, it's divided up beyond the vehicle. There's how do you manage the fleet, thinking about the cyber, thinking the actual vehicle or the broader infrastructure where all information is out there, the in-vehicle sort of experience, and as well the broader change and shift in electrified vehicle having a distinct impact on our utilities and energy structure. And all of these things is all tied together with both the mobile proliferate and connect all of these things. So it's a very different ecosystem to think about beyond just how do I make a car and get it across the finish line to you. Another interesting quote that we like to think about is whenever you get the idea that you're fixed or that anything is fixed for life, you better get ready for screw in today's world where a lot of us in automotive has many years of being sort of protected, and it's a capex intensive work, and it's really system integration with the various level suppliers, and on top of that a huge press towards safety and these, and as you think about that's for us, and autonomous vehicles change for us, this increasingly changed the way we have to think about the problem. And so this is where we are today, and again thought this was a pretty inspiring quote. How is Ford kind of doing this? Well, we actually have a number of research innovation centers across the globe. Since I'm from there, but kidding aside, Dearborn, Michigan is probably our largest. In Germany is one that we have based really around some of the telematics and the capabilities that were there. And what you see in here is really these offices are really built around the technology and talents that they offer, but also we're able to find sort of the best and sort of be hubs to take some of these technologies and help enable Ford's work there, and also commiserately be able to be part of the actual ecosystem. One of the things that you'll also notice that's not noted here is very recently we had opened one in Israel, and that's been in the public, and it's really, again, thinking about the ecosystem. Very great technology, a lot of the industrial military complex folks that come out from there, a thought process of really industrial and bulletproof built scalable technologies that's beyond just the borders of Israel with global applications. And we thought these were kind of things huge there, that this is how things happen. And I'm not saying that Silicon Valley or any of these hubs are the sort of only areas where innovation happens. I think these coalesce around development technology. I think very much, especially with my experiences coming to Korea, these are opportunities that if you have sort of the right motivation from a company and government and all the other players' perspective, really helps motivate in creating the right ecosystem to kind of be a self-fulfilling cycle here. For us, specifically in Silicon Valley, we began early with just a sort of observe and report facility, really small, 8 people. It was just upstairs of in downtown Palo Alto. Quickly, we realized at the time it was Mark Fields, who was our CEO, said, look, we got to do a lot more. So we opened our first research innovation center, went up the street a little bit, got a larger facility. That facility exploded over the years that it was growing to almost 200 people. Most recently, a couple years ago, we picked up 2 brand new buildings, and right now it says 250. We're almost probably close to 300 employees now. Although everybody's working at home, given the whole shelter-in-place regulation from the county, but I think it's a testament of the growth of the organization and sort of all working on together. And what are all these people doing there? Well, a big part as we think about strategic innovation and working with fast-moving outside parties and some of these startups is how do you kind of think about what's the value you bring to folks? I think it's very easy for large corporates to say, I'm going to open it off. That's not how this works. How this works is really a two-way street. A lot of the engagement means startups have ability to move fast and break things in extreme innovation. Larger companies have scale and conservatism and kind of they've learned things along the way by getting a lot of bruises. So they're by taking these two pieces, the conservative sort of scale capability with the fast moving new blood, you come up with something pretty powerful when you kind of are able to work on something together. From our perspective, we've connected with over 1,800 startups. We're actively at any given time probably working on 100 or so of these startup engagement. We're on the investment side. We know a lot of the VCs. We work with a lot of the incubator, accelerator type entities, and as well, we're very close to a lot of universities. And ultimately, a lot of this work culminates down to only a handful of investments, and as well to contribute to the ecosystem. We even talk to our folks like this because at the early stage, it's an ecosystem. Everybody is working together towards a common goal, and there's no sort of proprietary information necessarily being shared, but there's no sort of captive marketplace on innovation. So this is sort of a testament of the open innovation and how successful. Kind of looking more on the investment side of things, which is closer where my job is. And as you think about why we do this, is the change in the business climate. Traditionally, as I mentioned before, it's a tier model. You go from a tier 3 to a tier 2 to a tier 1, eventually reaching an OEM, and OEM sells that widget finally to the customer. And new capabilities, technologies that are out there. And it's really driven from every avenue, ranging from academia to startups to the investor and incubators and corporates, all working hand in hand, potentially with multiple players in this ecosystem to produce something really cool. And I think this is a very interesting time as you think trying to tackle some pretty big problems that larger companies and other players are willing to be open to work together on. And why does corporate venture capital and a lot of these strategic innovation things work is it really bridges some of the needs and sort of heartburn around this. Traditional integrators, we move slow, that's true. And what we want to do is we understand very much what to do today and what to do in the next coming months and what to do at the end of the year. And great planning and manufacturing is about discipline and timing. But as you look towards the future, when you think about autonomous vehicles or any of the new uncertainty, and how do you kind of understand and stay ahead, is you start engaging with the technology, you understand the technology, and then you have a clear strategy on how you can achieve some of those goals. And in the really far space, once upon a time, they said, oh, you can't necessarily go to the moon or you can't have a fully autonomous, these fantastical imaginings, but where do you bridge that idea and dream with some of the very near-term capabilities as compute powers and sensors get to a place that enable some of that, in my opinion, is you think of the research development work, but you augment that with strategic investment and spending time to be able to accomplish some of those and make that real. So that's why I think we're at a pretty interesting area to kind of think about this. And within Ford, here's a number of investments and acquisitions that we've done over the years. As you can see, very different from what you think would be a traditional automotive manufacturer. Is a lot of this is centered around we're finding new areas, but also leveraging new capabilities that startups are bringing to us and how we can work together. What you haven't seen on here maybe are some of the smaller ones, and I think what you'll understand is there's an opportunity for any and all of what you're doing and finding the right partner with the corporate side. And hopefully we're one of those folks that you think about as you want to do this. I've been participating in this culture event for a couple of years. I think it's a great opportunity. I think most of us that are in this role, and it's sort of our privilege to be able to try to so that we can help you, and hopefully we can solve some of these cool problems together. So thank you very much. Appreciate it, and stay safe, everybody. Hopefully we'll be able to do this in person the next time. Thank you.